Hey there everybody, it's Mark Crowley. I'm back with another How to Draw video. Today I'm in my living room and I've constructed, as you can see here, a strange little building composed of household objects, such as, what is this? Chili powder. And what I'm going to be doing is showing you how sometimes artists will construct things like this to help them get the perspective right, to supply reference for, especially for some sort of building that they're going to be drawing over and over again, let's say in a comic book story. So I thought I'd show you the real source of what will be a single photograph that I'm going to use as reference, and we're going to transform this into some sort of futuristic sci-fi building. Let's not waste any more time. Let's go ahead and get into it. Alright, so you can see how this photo basically allowed me to create the drawing based pretty closely upon it. I did allow myself to change certain things. This right here is sort of an upside down planter that I used, and it's maybe hard to see, but the support legs of it were kind of hollow, and I decided to go ahead and draw them as they look sort of like turrets, maybe almost, like a military defense kind of fortress. But one of the things that I want to start doing is it looks quite boxy to me, and I would allow myself the freedom to start changing things. Like I'm going to have a beveled edge to this section right here, but I got to remember that line right there, we got to keep that as the perspective line. And one of the advantages of creating a model like this is that, you know, if you have a trouble with perspective, with theoretical perspective, creating an actual model frees you of the labor of figuring out the perspective, because you just can, as I did today, sort of take photos of different sections of it. Since I've done this sort of beveling of this one area, I feel like that ought to be repeated at least once in the design, and so I'm going to do that again over here. But you can see how this line here, this helps me to understand and keep the perspective consistent. Of course, if you have studied perspective, that's going to help you with doing little modifications like this. My sort of understanding of perspective tells me that this line and this line have to be roughly parallel to one another from this point of view. And yeah, that sort of shows you how I can begin to alter things. One of the hardest things to do in perspective is a circle, so that's a good benefit of making a model like this. This basically, by looking at the way that it was sort of like a medicinal cup, of like cough medicine or something turned upside down. Having the photo to base it on, or indeed the model, really helps with figuring out how that circle would lay upon the surface of this sort of rooftop here. And then, since these lines are already in place, that allows you to add extra lines if you want to, which is kind of what I'm doing right now. And that's going to happen probably throughout the illustration. If we imagine this is some sort of tower block or something, then maybe this is where windows are going to go. And so yeah, you don't just stick with the boxy shapes of your original model. You allow yourself the freedom to add things. One thing I thought would be cool, and I'm looking again at the direction of these lines, is to add some sort of antenna type stuff, especially if this is supposed to be some kind of a sci-fi moon base or something like that. Getting a little extra vertical lines in here. Hang on, I'm going to actually on the fly move the camera just a little bit so that I could do a similar thing here. But notice that the direction of the antenna structures here is slightly different than over here, because it has to agree with these vertical lines. So that's part of what I wanted to show you, is that you're taking advantage of the model that you created, but you're not just stopping there and being absolutely bound by what was on the original objects. You can begin to add little details from your own imagination, which really is what I'm doing on the fly. This structure here. Who knows what it's supposed to be? Don't ask. But yeah, I'm going to continue. Like, I thought there should be some sort of entrance here. This seemed like it ought to be an entrance to the building, so I'm dropping in some lines, maybe try to get the distances there equal, and then come up with some sort of entrance-like shape that looks good to me. Maybe making it, again, getting that sort of beveled shape in there. And again, if you know perspective at least a little, that can help you to, let's say, turn this into an indentation of where the actual doorway would go. I'm going to erase this line away now so you can see how that would work out. Now, one of the other cool things about doing a model is it helps you figure out the lighting. And as I look at the shadows here, I don't know how well this is showing up, but that's going to help me in adding shadows to my illustration and having them be consistent with real-life shadows and how far, you know, like if I was doing this from my imagination, I don't know if I would realize that the shadow of this sort of cylindrical tower would go as far as the edge of the surface that it's on. But of course I looked at the photo and then saw indeed that it does go all the way to the edge and over the edge and casts a shadow upon the ground. So yeah, I'm not going to get too much farther into this, but just to give you a sense of how, for a lot of people, one of the key benefits of building a model of some kind for an imaginary structure in your comic book is that you can figure out the lighting different times of day and stuff like that. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and in time-lapse add further details and maybe come back when I have a little more of this done to see if there's any other further tips that I can give you. Alright, so I think I've got enough of the details in here now, and we're probably going to add even further details as I go along, but I thought I'd get back into this idea of where the shadows fall on these buildings, and being able to, you know, use this, the reference objects to help me get all of that accurately portrayed. It certainly is helpful, especially if you're going to be showing this building from multiple angles. You know, I would say if I were just going to show a building in a single frame, there's no way I'd go to the trouble of creating, you know, a 3D model like this. But certainly if you have a story in which a building is going to be seen again and again, different times of day, different points of view, different angles, yeah, it would be super helpful to build a model. I have to confess, I don't think I've really done it for any of my books, simply because I didn't have a building like that I can think of that came back again and again. I was able to sort of wing it for most of my different stories, but I can certainly imagine a scenario where I would need to do this. Or certainly would benefit from having. Now this, interestingly, because this was a clear, you know, semi-translucent kind of cup, that it doesn't really cast the sort of shadow. But again, I can look at the angle from these objects, and that can help me get some idea of how that shadow would fall. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and sort of finish up the shading and probably tighten up some of these lines. I might do that off camera in a way, using a ruler, which is not a lot of fun to look at in time-lapse anyway. I'm going to scan it into my computer and print it out in such a way, maybe at a slightly larger size, so as to be able to come back and add a little bit of white gouache, as I like to do, to you know, add some final highlights and give it that last little touch that I think will turn it into a more beautiful final illustration. So let's go ahead and finish up that part of it. I'll be back next time you see this. You're going to be seeing the computer printout version that came from my printer. Alright, so here's what the illustration looks like after the magic of Photoshop has been applied to it. I darkened up the shadows and added just a little bit of coloring here and there. And now I'm pulling out the beloved white gouache so that I can add a little bit of highlights throughout the illustration and maybe give you some closing bits of advice. You know, the truth is I could have spent far more time on this in terms of using the ruler to tighten up all the lines and so forth. I mean, the sky's the limit really in terms of how much you take a model like this and really try to turn it into something quite realistic looking. For now, I just thought I'd give you the sort of you know, quick version in which I applied a little bit of time to it, but didn't spend hours and hours. In any case, adding a little bit of these final highlights, I think, can really help with an illustration in terms of heightening the contrast. And, in this case, it becomes a sort of an interesting blend between computer coloring and hand-done work, which is kind of my favorite way of working. I like to let the computer help me a little bit in terms of, you know, adding tones and shading and different stuff like that. But I never like to completely lose the handmade touch of applying stuff like this, gouache, and of course beginning the whole illustration process with pencil on paper, just like I've always done. So let's go ahead and finish up some of this highlighting with time-lapse, and then I'll be back with a few final words. Alright, well there's my finished illustration showing you how you can use household objects to create a model for a sort of imaginary structure of some kind. I really hope you found this useful. I always like to end my videos, though, by thanking anyone who has supported me by getting any of my books, like Mastering Manga 1, 2, and 3. A lot of information about perspective drawing in this book here, if you're interested in that. The Drawing Lesson, my graphic novel that teaches you how to draw, and my very latest book, The Ultimate Book of Drawing Hands. I really cannot say thank you enough to those of you who choose to support me by getting any of those books, but I do think it's time for me to lay down this brush. I want to thank you all for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back with another one real soon.